Hello and welcome to another episode of Issues and Insights. I'm Bryce Shoemate, and today's guest, we have a man that's about town, just about every day. Dr. William Lee, our county coroner, and several of you out there have had Dr. Lee working on your teeth as well, because he was a dentist here in Elizabethtown for many years and just retired
2 years ago.
2 years ago, and still hard at it at Hardin County Coroner's Office. Dr. Lee, welcome to our show today.
Thank you, Bryce. Good to be here, man.
And I'm glad to see that you're here. You know, a lot of people don't realize that anytime that we have anybody pass away in our county, it is up to the coroner's office many times to see over who pronounces the death, either at the scene or at the hospital, is correct?
That's correct.
Who actually does that then?
Of course, if the patient is taken to the hospital and dies there, the emergency room doctor would make the initial pronouncement of death, and then the coroner would be called in. If anybody that dies in less than 24 hours at Hardin Memorial, we will get a call. Now, it may be something that we delegate to the physician, or we may go ahead and work it depending on the circumstances. And also, a law passed, I can't recall what year, but the hospice laws allow the hospice nurse to make a pronouncement, so the coroner does not have to be involved in going to the scene like we used to.
And make it a little easier on the family.
Right.
Absolutely.
And of course, in nursing homes and in the hospital, other than the emergency room, if you got a patient that's been there for a long time, extended care, the physician will take care of the death certificate, and if there's something a little suspicious, then we will be called in there. But if everything's straightforward, we wouldn't have to be involved in those.
Sure, and I know that through my friend Larry Calvert, we used to see you quite a bit with the funeral homes involved,
right,
and working close. You work in close conjunction with many of the funeral homes in our area.
Now, that's a busy place for us. Obviously, they or somebody's going to get the deceased body. So, if it's local people, typically we'll be releasing the deceased to the local funeral homes. We have 6 in the county, and of course, sometimes they're brought in. Someone is brought in from Meade County or LaRue County and dies at the hospital. It's a county where you're pronounced dead. That coroner works it. On the other hand, if we medevac a traffic victim from Patriot Parkway and they're taken up to, say, a University Hospital and pronounced up there, the Jefferson County coroner works the case. So we work with the funeral homes to release to the respective funeral home that the family desires.
You know, Dr. Lee, a lot of people don't know that many times we have a natural disaster. You respond not only over the state of Kentucky, but you have gone actually all throughout the United States to help in natural disasters, to help identify those folks that have perished.
That's correct. Of course, with my background in forensic dentistry that I picked up in the Navy before I came to E-Town, I'm on this federal team called the DMORT, Disaster Mobilization Response Team, and I've been to, Katrina, and had to make identities on those bodies that were found up in fence rows and under buildings and so forth. I spent 2 weeks in Haiti, about 110-degree temps back after that earthquake, and of course the Comair crash here in Kentucky had 49 folks that had to be identified by their teeth, and I think out of the 49, I think we got 48 out of the 49 by teeth, because they were all charred and burned beyond recognition. And so my dental background comes into play.
I don't think people realize, that our Hardin County coroner has that expertise and is actually called upon by all areas.
I think in Kentucky, of the 120 counties, only 2 of us have a dentist in the coroner's office. Over in the Ashland area, that's Boyd County. A friend of mine is the deputy coroner there, and then of course I'm the elected coroner here in Hardin County. So.
Sure. And speaking of that, how many deputy coroners do you actually have? And we talked about this last weekend before the snow. How many deputy coroners do you actually have?
We have 5 in Hardin County. That's the number of deputies is pretty much based on the population. Like in LaRue County to our south, smaller population, they've got 2 deputies, and Jefferson County to our north, with their population, they've got, I think, about 10 or maybe more than that by now, but we have 5, and 2 are considered full-time. Everybody else is part-time.
And I knew Spanky was full-time, Kenneth Spankenberger,
right.
and then...
And Shana, our newest deputy, Shana Norton, who comes from a background working with the medical examiner's office. She's the one that had to help on preparing the bodies for the autopsies, and she was a deputy coroner in Shelby County, her home county, for a while. Married an E-Town guy, so that brought her back down to
And they just had a new baby not too long
new baby.
ago.
It's born November 28th.
So we want to say congratulations
yes,
to
sir.
her.
Right.
She's watching this show, you know, and she better be since she's working for you. That's where you.
In fact, I invited her down here to view, but she's busy right now. So.
Okay. You know, Dr. Lee, people often wonder, you know, for retail business, Christmas time is the busiest time of their whole year. When would you say is your all's busiest season through the whole year?
It varies quite a bit, surprisingly. Winter time, there are a lot of elderly deaths related to health issues, and maybe temperatures get a little more extreme, and they're not able to cope with some of the medical conditions. So sometimes December and January are bad months, but then sometimes in April and May, June, right in that, and we seem to have a lot of suicides then. I think
June.
people are seeing that their condition has not changed much, and here trees are greening up and flowers are blooming, and yet their condition is the same. They get discouraged, and we see suicides then, and of course we see them around the holidays sometimes too.
I know when we talked about Larry used to say it seemed like people would hold on always until just right after Christmas, and after Christmas it seems like they'd kind of pass away after they'd made it through that season. And so I always wondered, do you see a lot of that?
I think we do, and again, those elderly folks that I think it may be partly related to the weather, but the holidays and just getting through it to see the loved ones one more time, I do sense that sometimes. Yes.
Yeah. Do you, I know a lot of times you told me that your deputies will take care of the weekends. You know, you handle pretty much, you and your full-time staff members handle pretty much through the week, and a lot of your deputies handle late evening calls and weekend calls, correct?
Of course, I take it to 24 hours a day. Sunday night, I usually come on about 7 or 8 o'clock at night and take it all the way through till Thursday morning at 8. Spanky's got Thursday and Friday, and then he's available all during the week. So, but I'm on call day and night. We don't have any specific time. It's days. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
Right.
Could be morning or midnight. Now the deputies rotate. Our weekend rotation starts about 6:30 on Friday night and goes through Sunday night when I take back over. So they've got all day Saturday, pretty much all day Sunday. And this past weekend, John Clemens was the first call, but things got a little hectic, and Spanky actually helped him, so both of them were involved. And there's sometimes we've had some cases where there have been 4 of us on one case.
And let's talk about that. You start seeing cases. I know a lot of times, and you and I have worked together over the years. When I was before I retired from the police department, you and I worked together. Spanky and I worked together. You all work a lot of times hand in hand with police departments, state police, and so on. Sheriff's Department, when you do have an investigation, whether it's a questionable death, a suicide, a homicide, you all work hand in hand with them.
That's very important. In fact, I always like to say that even though the coroner is the one that signs the death certificate as to the cause of death, I guarantee you I don't know all the answers. So I have to depend on law enforcement, the medical examiner, the physicians in the hospital, or maybe a family physician that can give me some background on the history that helps us toward the finding the cause of death. Law enforcement to be doing interviews and securing scenes and gathering evidence. Fire departments and for those fire deaths. Just a lot of folks come into play. It's a team effort, and I work with the Fed sometimes. We had a case where a person who was under the Witness Protection Act, I guess it's called, from New York City, had been told to move to Atlanta, Georgia, came up here and died in our motel. And the FBI came in just making sure that he had not been poisoned or killed. So he worked with us, and we worked with the Federal Aviation folks on airplane crashes. So I work with the Feds as well as the State Medical Examiner's Office.
And you said something, a team effort. That's very much a team effort on some occasions, correct?
Yeah, it is very much so.
And in saying that, I can remember back in the time before, or right as you took over as coroner, back before it was so much of a team effort, a lot of times law enforcement would come in and move things before you got there, and it would be hard to tell whether that was the actual cause of death or could have been something else. And I know you have been very substantial effort in making sure that you are a team effort, that everybody works together and nothing's moved before everybody goes in and works it together, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. We need to know each other's role, and of course times have changed too. We're in a more litigious society now. Everybody wants to blame somebody else and sue somebody else, so if you don't have things documented pretty well, you could get yourself in trouble. And for instance, a shooting death, for instance, is it a homicide, or is it suicide, or is it an accidental death? Maybe a person might be playing with a gun and it accidentally discharges, so we've got to work with the police, and they do the interviews and collect the evidence. We're looking for fingerprints and body tissue on the gun, maybe a lot of factors that come into play. It takes all of us to come up with those answers.
And I know a lot of times when you and I were out working scenes, we would make sure that one of our big things before we released names to media was that you or one of the deputies had contacted all the family members, because we don't want to let that information get out in the way that the family learns. And media, please, we're not meaning this in a bad way, but we want to make sure that you get a personal phone call to let the family members know first.
In fact, again, with the times changing with social media now, Facebook, we've had a case where a person had the same name as another, the deceased, and the wrong family was contacted on Facebook of the death, and that was not the person who was dead. So it presents some difficult situations sometimes, and the wrong name getting out too soon.
Actually,
whatever. So
absolutely, and I even think about the homicide from Radcliffe back earlier last year, where family members showed up on the scene because of Facebook, people talking about this scene in Radcliffe, and nobody had actually made any contact with any family members because they were still investigating the scene. I think you even had a deputy coroner from Meade County there because you all were tied up in other means that day.
Yeah, James Chisholm helped us out that day. He's a Meade County deputy, and we help each other out. It's another talk about teamwork. We assist Meade County, and they assist us, and LaRue County. We actually have been called on to help in 3 or 4 of our neighboring counties in different situations.
Absolutely. Sometimes when we have people that pass away, sometimes people don't understand the only way we can maybe find the cause of death is an autopsy has to be performed. Folks maybe don't always understand when does an autopsy need to be performed and when does it not?
That's a good question, and some people think there's mandatory autopsies in Kentucky, but we don't have any. There's a federal law that says a pilot and co-pilot of an airplane have to be autopsied. We might say that there is a Kentucky statute before we can put SIDS, that's sudden infant death syndrome, for a young baby less than a year old. Before we can put that on a death certificate, we have to rule out all other possibilities: trauma, domestic issues, congenital defects, and the only way to rule that out would be an autopsy. So,
and we've actually had those types of cases in Kentucky, here in Hardin County.
Right there in Hardin County, exactly. And where the autopsy proved it was a homicide or it was a natural congenital defect that caused the death. So,
or it may even prove that it actually was a homicide.
Yes, it has happened.
Absolutely.
Very, very much so. So the autopsy is performed. Sometimes we get credit for it at the coroner, but we in Kentucky do not do autopsies. We have forensic pathologists. There are about 8 in the state, scattered about 4 different centers. We use the Louisville Medical Examiner's Office for Hardin County, and the forensic pathologist actually does the autopsy. They're medically trained. We are there many times to assist, but they're the ones that actually have the knowledge of the human body more than a lay coroner would.
So autopsies aren't actually done in Hardin County. No. You have to take them to Louisville to have those done.
Yes. Used to be several, there must have been 10 or 12 hospitals throughout Kentucky, this like 30 years ago, and the hospital pathologists would do autopsies, but then they started going into court where there was testimony with certified forensic pathologists were brought in by defense attorneys to counteract, and They got beat, these hospital pathologists did. So now we have certified forensic pathologists. They have the credentials when you get into court. That you have the top-notch people that are doing the autopsies and making those decisions.
And sometimes we've seen, of course, anytime we watch a lot of TV shows, we see a lot of these things like, where people have had to have an autopsy to help with the investigation of the case. But sometimes old cases where the body has to be exhumed out of the burial plot and bring back in. Why do they do those kind of things, Dr. Lee?
Sometimes there's more evidence that comes forth later. We had one case that I can think of myself that involved a nursing home where there's some questions about a death, been many years ago, and the evidence came from a phone call. They didn't give their name, and we met with E-Town Police Department and ended up feeling there was enough evidence we needed to exhume the body. Took them up to Louisville, and sure enough there was the bed rail had caused the death, and not just a natural heart attack and laying back in the nursing home bed. So if there's more evidence that comes forth later, then just to make sure. And I think there have been
and that goes back to the liability that you were talking about earlier. You start looking at things that are missed and could come back and hurt not just you, but the place that they stayed at or wherever. So liability is major in all this.
This goes on back several layers sometimes. So autopsies are important, and again, the pathologist is at the discretion of the coroner in Kentucky. Some states like California, when O.J. trial was going on, the coroner was a forensic pathologist. And I remember at that time seeing him go through his testimony in court on TV and leafing through all the pages, and I was kind of actually embarrassed to be a coroner at that time. I didn't feel like he was prepared, but that's beside the story. But the coroner gathers the information from the pathologist, and we actually will request the autopsy. Sometimes families will disagree, and the only time I've been threatened to be killed, and as a coroner in Hardin County, was saying I was going to do an autopsy, and the husband threatened to kill me and said he was not. We were not. But I've got the authority to do that, and that keeps a man from killing his wife and then covering up and get her buried, and then all your evidence is gone. So somebody has to be able to make that decision.
So do a lot of large cities in Kentucky have forensic pathologists that work with their law enforcement agencies?
No, they're all in these 4 centers: Louisville, Frankfort, Northern Kentucky, and Madisonville, the 4 centers.
Because I know I've had some young people, that wanted to be involved in law enforcement, but they decided they wanted to be forensic pathologists. And
that's a medical degree, an intern a year probably, a pathology specialty, and then a forensic. So you have maybe 9 or 10 years past your college to be a certified forensic pathologist. It's a long, extensive training.
Now, with all that we're talking about here with the autopsies and forensic pathologists and everybody doing their work, what's the difference in what you're talking about versus, say, somebody talking about a post-mortem exam?
That's a good question, too. The statutes have about 19 different type deaths where the coroner is to perform a post-mortem exam. Now, post-mortem is just a physical and visual gathering data. May just evaluate rigor mortis, which is it starts in the jaw. It takes about 3 hours to get stiff, and you might evaluate that for time of death estimation. But the autopsy is a medical procedure done by a medical doctor, where you're looking inside the body, reflecting the tissues back, looking at the heart to see if there is a congenital problem, or if the bullet goes in this way and comes out, what vessels does it pierce to make it a homicide. So they've got that medical background to do that. And the coroner is a layperson. Kentucky, you don't have to be much to be a coroner. I don't know if you know that, but
no, I didn't know that.
3 things. You can be at least 24 years of age, a resident of the state for 2 years, a resident of the county for 1 year. If you get enough votes, you can be the coroner.
Of course, when
I
was growing up, Doc Studeville was the coroner here in Hardin County.
I trained under him. Those 2 years of being his deputy, that was an experience and learning experience. Great.
I bet. I remember many times going to, as a young man, on the fire department in Vine Grove, going, to scenes with them.
He had to be the best.
Lift.
I think he was one of the best, if not the best, in Kentucky over the years.
Well, and What you talked about, you don't have to have a whole lot of training. What kind of training do you all actually have to go through? Because I know Spanky tells me all the time that he's been through this and this class and this class. Of course, anybody that knows Spanky, we love him. We love Spanky, but Spanky loves to talk, and so sometimes I'm going, Spanky, are you pulling my leg, or are you telling me the truth? Yes, and so Spanky, if you're watching this right now, you know I love you. But you know, a lot of things when you talk about training, you have to do some.
Yes. Once you're elected or appointed, as the deputies are appointed by the elected coroner, you have to go through a basic training, and it's either at Richmond or Frankfurt. They split it up sometimes, and it's a 40-hour training, and then you have to get to 18 hours each year to stay certified, and you can pick different topics. It'll be homicide, traffic fatalities, children's death, even things like photography, scene investigation. We can choose a different topic each year.
So Spanky, because he's full-time, does he have to get more training in than, say, John, who is just a part-time coroner?
Each of us still has to get that 18 hours each year. Now, we have a conference coming up in April each year, and we can get a lot of training there. We can take some class. I know Spanky went down to Pensacola, Florida, and took a class under Michael Biden and Henry Lee, who are two of the top-notch death investigators in this nation. You may have heard those names before. And I think he went to something up in Michigan at one time. So, and Barry, I remember went to what's called a master's program at St. Louis University, and a week-long thing. So there are a lot of opportunities besides the mandatory things we have in Kentucky.
Absolutely. Well, and you know, do you see that does every case have its own difficulty when you get there, or does it seem like nowadays things seem to go easier, or does it seem like nowadays, because of covering, say, everything for liability reasons, is it more difficult nowadays with all your paperwork and everything that you've got to do, crossing every T and dotting every I, than what you started out with, Doc Studeville?
Paperwork-wise, there is a lot more papers and documents to fulfill for the state and different agencies, but actually the investigation at the scene is not a whole lot different, I don't think. We still approach the scene the same way, whether it's a 90-year-old grandmother or if it's a 5-year-old kid that's been run over out on the street. We've got certain things we have to do when we get on the scene, and the coordination thing we've talked about already. Just making sure you got everything measured and photographed, documented, history, speaking to the family or employers, a lot of different folks that you gather information from. So it's pretty much the same.
Looking back at those days of Doc Studeville and you being a deputy coroner, do you see the call volume from then has increased dramatically?
Right. Sure has. In
over
fact,
the years?
I counted the numbers up. My first year was 1986 as the elected coroner. I was a deputy 2 years prior to that, but we had 186 cases, coroner cases that year. And this past year, 678.
Wow.
It's jumped up. I don't know what percentage that is. But
five times the work.
And it's interesting, I think the whole year of 86, I signed papers for cremations, I think maybe 20 to 25 for the whole year. Now we get that many in 1 month for cremations. A lot of people, because of the cost of burials, social feelings, just their family wishes and so forth, there are a lot more cremations, but the coroner has to sign the papers to keep the person from being cremated, and then say, oops, we forgot to check on the fingerprints or hair samples or whatever, we messed up on something. So cremation, you've got to put some thought into it before you sign the paper that allows the funeral home to cremate that deceased person.
So if there was any kind of question on the cause of death on that, then it would become more of a hesitation to allow that then?
Right. And in fact, on this most recent case we've had, I'm hearing on Facebook again, I don't like to hear that, but people feeling like you might want a second autopsy on this particular case we've had. And don't cremate this person was urging the family not to cremate because you might want to get a second autopsy.
Right.
And sometimes second autopsies are done, but the request of a defense attorney or a family or whatever, but sometimes I may not feel like we need an autopsy, but the family may want one, and I'll honor that if they want one.
So between 14 and 15, you talked about since 86 to now, 5 times.
30 years.
Between 2014, 2015, were the numbers that much different?
I think a little over 600, went up about 50 from 2014 to 2006.
So it's somewhat stabilized.
That's it. It is. It's definitely increasing. If you look on our bi-monthly graphs that we present to fiscal court, it's a steady incline every year.
And you know, one thing I got to ask, and you and I talked about this the other day, and we're about out of time. When we get together, our time goes by real fast. But wintertime deaths, some of the things that you see that cause wintertime deaths, since we're right smack in the middle of January, getting ready to go in February, what are some of the things that we need to caution our people about for an accidental winter death?
Well, just be safe on the ice. Outside, we had our first weather-related death the other day. A man shoveling snow, actually sweeping snow, and had heart problems and died of a heart attack. So if you got some health issues, be careful, wrap up, take care of yourself physically. Don't overdo anything stress-wise.
So family members keep close watch on those.
Watch your neighbors, because a lot of times an elderly person lives by themselves and they're not checked. A week later they're found dead, which has happened in the past. So check your neighbors, especially elderly folks with medical problems, and then be careful out on the roads. People get so distracted nowadays, it's unbelievable that they don't pay attention. They get too close in bad weather.
Ice and snow.
Give that little extra distance between your car and the car in front.
And something else people might want to invest in, especially when we talk about wintertime heating, is those CO2.
Carbon monoxide.
Yeah.
Carbon monoxide.
CO detectors. I said CO2, CO detectors to make sure that their gas heat or their heating device is not emanating dangerous fumes, because it's odorless.
Yes, it is.
And we wouldn't know it until we started having some symptoms.
And the little heater, portable heaters that get too close to the couch or clothing or whatever, that's happened before. It's lit the house up. So be careful with those portable heaters.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Dr. Lee. I know we talked about that the other day. I said I wanted to kind of think about some of those things we should caution people this time of year. Okay. Dr. Lee, our time goes by so quick when we're talking, and I appreciate everything that you do. I know that you have a job sometimes that a lot of people would say, man, I don't envy you. I don't want to do those kind of things. But in other ways, it's been a very rewarding job over the years as well.
It has. Yes, sir.
Dr. Lee, thank you so much for your service. We appreciate you, and thank you for coming on our show of Issues and Insights. And folks, we ask you to stay tuned to Hardin County Educational Community TV as we strive every show to keep you informed on what's going on in this big county of Hardin. And more importantly, through our shows that we show you all, is to keep you informed on what's going on in your students' life in Hardin County School System. Today's episode of Issues and Insights is sponsored by Hardin County Government and by the Hardin County School System. Stay tuned for the rest of this month as we keep you informed. And remember, we've still got plenty of winter to go. Be safe, as Dr. Lee said. Think about some of these things we talked about and use good common sense during the winter months. Be careful out there on the roads. Give yourself plenty of room between you and others. And pay attention to your local channels as we keep you advised on weather conditions, road conditions, and what things need to be told about when we start talking about some of this winter weather. Thanks for joining us. Dr. Lee, thank you.
Thanks, Bryce.
And everybody stay safe.